My ex-husband paid my boyfriend to destroy my life and turn my kids against me, and my boyfriend kept the secret for 7 years. Hello, Reddit. I never thought I'd be sharing my story like this, but after everything that has happened, I just need to get it off my chest. I spent years building a life I was proud of, only to find out that the man I loved, the one I trusted the most, had been part of an elaborate scheme to destroy me. My ex-husband, Nathan, wasn't satisfied with just losing me. He wanted to ruin me completely. So, he paid my boyfriend to turn my own children against me, shatter my happiness, and leave me with nothing. The worst part? My boyfriend kept this secret for 7 years, pretending to love me while hiding the cruelest betrayal imaginable. But let me start from the beginning. Nathan and I were married for nearly 2 decades, but looking back, I realize now that our relationship was never built on love, it was built on control. When we first met, he was charming, successful, and knew exactly how to make me feel special. I was young, naive, and believed he truly wanted the best for me. But as the years passed, the truth became impossible to ignore. Nathan wanted a wife who catered to him, not a partner. He dictated how I dressed, what I did, and even who I could be friends with. Whenever I tried to express a dream of my own, whether it was going back to school or starting a business, he would subtly, and sometimes not so subtly, discourage me. "Why would you need to work when I provide everything?" he would say with a condescending smile. But it wasn't about providing, it was about power. He wanted to ensure that I had no independence, no way to leave him, and no life outside of the one he controlled. The emotional manipulation was relentless. If I questioned him, I was ungrateful. If I showed frustration, I was too emotional. He would twist my words, gaslight me into believing I was overreacting, and then shower me with just enough kindness to keep me from leaving. And for a long time, it worked. Until it didn't. It took me years to gather the strength, but I finally left Nathan. It wasn't easy. He made sure of that. He tried to convince me that I was making the biggest mistake of my life, that no one else would ever love me, that I was throwing away my perfect family. But I knew deep down that if I stayed, I would lose myself entirely. The divorce was brutal. He fought me at every turn, dragging out the process and making it as painful as possible. But for the first time in years, I had something he couldn't take away from me, my resolve. No matter how many mind games he played, I refused to go back. I had no idea that my decision to leave him would set off a chain of events that would destroy my life in ways I never could have imagined. After the divorce, I was finally free. For the first time in years, I could breathe. I could dream again. And so, I threw myself into something I had always wanted, a skincare business. It started small, just me experimenting with homemade formulas in my kitchen, but I had a passion for it. My children, Emily and Lucas, were my biggest supporters, encouraging me every step of the way. And it worked. Slowly, my business grew. I went from selling to close friends to building a brand that actually gained recognition. I was independent, happy, and for the first time, truly proud of myself. That's when I met Daniel. Daniel was everything Nathan wasn't: kind, supportive, and genuinely interested in me as a person. He made me feel valued, like my dreams and opinions mattered. He was the one cheering me on, helping me expand my business, and reminding me that I was capable of so much more than I had ever been allowed to believe. After years of being controlled and diminished, Daniel was a breath of fresh air. I trusted him. I let him into my life, my business, my heart. We built a relationship that lasted for over a decade. Or at least, that's what I thought. But Nathan wasn't done with me. Even after the divorce, he couldn't stand the fact that I had moved on, that I was thriving without him. He made sure to remind me of his presence, always finding ways to insert himself into my life. Sometimes it was subtle, a comment about how lucky I was that he had provided for me all those years, as if my success was somehow his doing. Other times, it was cruel. He would belittle my business, call it a hobby, and tell our children that I was wasting my time. At the time, I thought it was just bitterness. I thought he was simply a sore loser who couldn't handle the fact that I had built something without him. I had no idea that behind the scenes, he was orchestrating something much darker. Because what I didn't know then was that Nathan had already found the perfect way to get his revenge. He had paid the one person I trusted most, Daniel, to destroy me from the inside. For years, I lived in blissful ignorance. My business thrived, my relationship with Daniel felt solid, and despite Nathan's occasional jabs, I thought I had finally left the worst behind me. I had no idea that the very man I woke up next to every morning was the reason my life was about to fall apart. Because soon, my children, my biggest champions, my greatest joys, would turn against me. They would accuse me of things I had never done, cut me out of their lives, and leave me shattered and alone. And the man I had trusted the most would let it happen. The truth wouldn't come out for another 7 years. 7 years of living with the man who had orchestrated my downfall. 7 years of sleeping next to my greatest betrayer. 7 years of believing a lie. But when the truth finally came out, it shattered my world in ways I never could have prepared for. If I had known what was coming, I would have paid closer attention to the warning signs. But when you trust someone, when you've built a life with them, you never imagine that they might be the reason it all falls apart. It started gradually, subtly. At first, it was small things. My children, Emily and Lucas, who had always been my biggest supporters, began pulling away. It was barely noticeable at first, a missed phone call here, an unanswered text there. They had their own lives, I told myself. College, friends, new responsibilities. It was natural for them to be busy. But then it got worse. The warmth in their voices faded, replaced with something else, something cold, something distant. Conversations became shorter, filled with awkward silences. When I asked what was wrong, they brushed me off. Nothing, Mom. Just busy. I could feel it, though. A shift. A wall growing between us. I thought back to every conversation, every interaction, trying to pinpoint when it had started. Had I done something wrong? Had I unknowingly hurt them? But no matter how much I searched for an answer, I found nothing. Then, one day, the distance turned into something much worse. I had spent years building my skincare business from the ground up, and finally, it had become something I could be proud of. Orders were coming in faster than I could keep up, and a major investor had just signed on. It was a huge moment for me, something worth celebrating. So, I invited everyone, friends, colleagues, and, of course, my children. I wanted them to be there, to share in the moment, to see that everything I had worked for was finally paying off. Emily and Lucas showed up, but something was off. They barely looked at me. They kept their distance, whispering to each other, their expressions unreadable. Then, in the middle of the celebration, just as I was about to give a speech, Emily stood up. Her voice was sharp, filled with anger I didn't understand. "You're a fraud." The entire room fell silent. My heart stopped. "What?" I managed to whisper, my voice barely audible. Lucas stepped forward, his face filled with something worse than anger, disgust. "We know what you did, Mom." I couldn't breathe. "What are you talking about?" Emily's hands trembled as she held up her phone. "We know the truth. You ruined Dad's life. You manipulated everyone. You lied to us." I looked at them, searching for an explanation, trying to understand. What lies? What have I done? But they wouldn't listen. In front of everyone, my own children accused me of being a manipulative, deceitful woman who had built her success on betrayal. They said they had seen proof, evidence that painted me as the villain in their father's story. I begged them to tell me what they had seen, who had told them these things, but they wouldn't say. Then, they walked out. I stood there, humiliated, broken, my entire world crumbling around me. For weeks, I tried to reach them, but my calls went unanswered. The silence was unbearable. I didn't understand. My children had always known who Nathan was. They had seen his cruelty, his manipulation. So how had he turned them against me? The answer came in the most unexpected way. One night, I got a call. It was from an old acquaintance, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice hesitant. And then, she told me everything. Nathan had never let go of his need to control me, even after the divorce. He had spent years weaving a web of lies, slowly poisoning my children against me. But he hadn't done it alone. He had paid my ex-boyfriend, before Daniel, to help him. That man, someone I had once trusted, had been working behind the scenes, planting doubt, twisting the truth, feeding my children false stories about me. It had been going on for years. The realization hit me like a truck. Nathan had orchestrated everything. He had made sure my children saw only what he wanted them to see, turning them against me little by little. And the worst part? The betrayal hadn't stopped with him. Because Daniel, the man I had loved, the one who had stood by me for 11 years, had known. He had known the entire time. For 7 years, he had kept the truth from me. He had looked me in the eyes every day, shared a bed with me, built a life with me, all while carrying the weight of this horrible secret. I confronted him that same night. At first, he denied it. But when he saw the evidence, the messages, the payments, the undeniable proof, his face went pale. "I was going to tell you," he finally admitted, his voice trembling. I didn't know how. I stared at him, my chest tightening with rage and heartbreak. "You didn't know how? You had 7 years, Daniel." Tears welled up in his eyes, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no sadness. Just cold, empty betrayal. "I never meant for it to go this far," he whispered. "I fell in love with you. I regretted it, but I cut him off. But you let it happen. You let my children hate me. You let me believe in a lie. You chose to stay silent." And in that moment, I knew there was no coming back from this. Nathan won. My children disowned me. No matter how much I tried to explain, they wouldn't listen. They had been convinced, manipulated beyond reason. Daniel left. Or rather, I threw him out. And just like that, everything I had built came crashing down. For weeks, I didn't leave my house. I stopped eating. Stopped answering my phone. The pain was unbearable, a weight I couldn't lift. The only thing I had left was my business. And so, I poured everything into it, trying to drown out the heartbreak with work. But nothing could erase the emptiness of losing my children. Eventually, I packed my bags and left. I moved to a new city, far from the memories, far from the betrayal. But no matter how far I ran, I couldn't escape the truth. The man I had loved had betrayed me. My ex-husband had destroyed me. And my children, the ones I had loved more than anything, were gone. 9 years. 9 years of silence. 9 years of living with the unbearable weight of loss. I had convinced myself that Emily and Lucas were never coming back, that they had chosen their father's lies over the truth, and that I would have to live with it for the rest of my life. I had tried to move on. Therapy helped. Time dulled the pain, but it never erased it. The betrayal ran too deep, and no matter how much success I found in my business, nothing could fill the void my children had left behind. Then, one evening, my phone rang. I almost didn't answer. The number was unfamiliar, but something in my gut told me to pick up. When I did, I heard a voice I never thought I'd hear again. "Mom?" My breath caught. It was Emily. My Emily. The little girl who used to run into my arms, who once called me her best friend, who had turned her back on me all those years ago. I didn't know what to say. My hands shook. My heart pounded. "Mom," she whispered, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry." Emily told me everything. Nathan was dead. He had been sick for months, and in his final days, he had finally told the truth. He admitted to everything: the lies, the manipulation, the way he had paid my ex-boyfriend to sabotage my life. He had confessed to poisoning my children against me, planting false evidence, and making sure they believed I was the villain. But the worst part? Daniel had known from the beginning. He hadn't just been complicit in Nathan's scheme, he had been part of it. He had helped carry out the plan, feeding my children fabricated stories, pushing them further away from me. And then, even after I had lost everything, he had stayed. He had lived with me, loved me, built a life with me for 7 years, all while knowing the truth. Nathan's confession shattered everything Emily had believed. She and Lucas had spent years resenting me, convinced I was a monster, only to realize they had been played. And now the guilt was eating them alive. "Please," she begged, sobbing into the phone. "Can we see you? Can we talk?" Seeing my children again after nearly a decade was surreal. They looked different, older, more mature, but the pain in their eyes was unmistakable. Lucas couldn't even look at me at first. He just stood there, his hands trembling. "Mom, His voice cracked, and suddenly he was hugging me, gripping me so tightly as if he was afraid I would disappear. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Emily cried as she apologized, telling me how much she hated herself for believing the lies. They had been so sure they were right, so convinced that they had been protecting their father's legacy. But now, they realized the truth had been in front of them all along. We talked for hours, unraveling nearly a decade of heartbreak. There was no easy fix, no instant repair for the years we had lost. But for the first time in forever, I had my children back. And that was enough. Then, Emily said something that made my stomach turn. "Daniel wants to see you." I wasn't sure I had it in me to face him. But eventually, I agreed to meet. He looked the same, but there was something different about him, something broken. "I was a coward," he admitted, sitting across from me. "I betrayed you for money. At first, that's all it was. But then I fell in love with you." I scoffed. "And that was enough for you? Loving me was enough to justify keeping the truth from me?" His eyes filled with regret. "I wanted to tell you. 100 times, I wanted to tell you. But every time I tried, I convinced myself it was too late. That if I told you, I'd lose you." I shook my head, anger and heartbreak swirling inside me. "You lost me the moment you chose to keep the truth." He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "I don't forgive you, Daniel. And I never will." It's been a year since that day. Emily and Lucas are back in my life, and we're slowly rebuilding what was lost. It's not perfect, and maybe it never will be. But we're trying. Daniel is gone. I made my peace with the fact that I will never understand his choices, and I refuse to waste another second of my life grieving over him. As for me, I'm still healing. Therapy helps. Some days are better than others. But no matter how much time passes, one truth remains. The people you love the most can hurt you in ways you never imagined. And sometimes, the truth comes too late.